For nearly 1,000 years, between roughly 500 and 1350 CE, European society operated like a strict pyramid. You lived, worked, and died exactly where you were born, taking orders from the people above you. Knowledge was locked away behind a massive language barrier. All important books and documents were written in Latin. Very few people actually knew how to read Latin. That skill belonged almost exclusively to officials in the Catholic Church, meaning a tiny fraction of the population had total control over what was considered true. On the ground, everyday survival relied on an economic system called feudalism. Regular people worked the land for wealthy nobles, and in exchange, those nobles provided physical protection from outside threats. Life was entirely about following instructions. You didn't discover the truth. It was handed down to you by a king or a pope. That rigid structure cracked during a series of wars called the Crusades. While fighting in Southwest Asia, Europeans crossed paths with Muslim and Byzantine scholars. These Eastern scholars had spent centuries carefully saving the ancient writings of Greece and Rome, texts that Western Europe had almost entirely lost. When those ancient texts finally made their way back to places like Italy, they ignited an obsession with an old idea that a single human being had the potential to change the world through their own efforts. But sharing these ideas was a logistical nightmare. Every single book had to be copied out by hand, making them incredibly rare and wildly expensive. Europe was sitting on a mountain of dangerous new ideas, with absolutely no efficient way to spread them. The solution arrived in the 1400s when a German inventor named Johannes Gutenberg built the printing press. This machine allowed printers to produce thousands of copies at a fraction of the cost, and they started printing them in local languages like English, French, and Italian. This printed copy of the Christian Bible from that era was translated into everyday German. It became the century's massive bestseller. With the Bible in their own language, people could read it themselves, no longer relying on church officials to interpret God's word. As everyday people read the text independently, many concluded that the intensely wealthy Catholic Church had strayed from its original teachings. They started loudly demanding that the institution reform itself. Giving the public direct access to information rapidly broke down the authority that institutions held over what people were allowed to think. The printing press also circulated ancient Greek texts focused entirely on science and the physical world. Thinkers stopped accepting old assumptions about how nature worked. They decided to closely observe natural events and carefully write down what they saw. To prove their theories, they realized they needed a clear, repeatable process to physically test their ideas against reality. The study of the physical world shifted completely. Facts were no longer true because a king ordered them to be. They were true because the data proved it. At the same time, the old social order was collapsing. In the 1300s, a devastating plague wiped out millions, fatally weakening the feudal system that had kept peasants tied to the land. Into that power vacuum stepped everyday merchants in Italy and Northern Europe, who built immense wealth strictly through trade and banking. Armed with economic power and this new focus on scientific reasoning, this merchant class began applying logic to the way society was run. They started asking a very dangerous question, challenging kings and wealthy nobles to actually justify why they deserved their authority. Once individuals realize they can understand nature and religion using their own minds, naturally demand a say in how they are governed. This massive cultural shift became known as the Renaissance, a word that literally translates to rebirth. A moment of wonder. Looking at this famous ceiling painted by Michelangelo, you can see what that rebirth actually meant. It was an intense elevation of human potential and the birth of the individual. Between 1400 and 1800, humanity evolved. People stopped blindly accepting dictated instructions and started aggressively questioning the natural world, organized religion, and political power. So every time you use logic to win an argument, run an experiment in science class, or read an article to form your own opinion, you are using the exact way of thinking invented by those rebels 600 years ago.